Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And in this video I'm painting with Death Guard squad, specifically the Death Guard model from the recent Kill Team release box. I have painted these models on the channel before, but this painting guide is going to be slightly different to that. So if you've seen that painting guide, keep watching because there are differences and you can pick which one you prefer. So starting off with the primary difference in this painting scheme to what I've done before is the use of grell and earth. Now this is a Games Workshop technical paint and it's like a paste, it's a sort of thick paste. You put it on to a layer kind of 1/2 mm to 1 mm thick. It takes a while to dry, but then it cracks and fragments, and this will give a really nice cracked armour effect when we get to the final end of the scheme. Now I've used this a lot before, but it tends to be on big vehicles and things like where you can do big flat panels. I have never used it on individual miniatures before, so it's a bit of an experiment, but it has really worked. So wait till you get to the end and see what the final effect is like. So we put that grell and earth down, and that needs a long time to dry. I let it dry overnight before moving on to any other stages. Because obviously if you put paint on top of the wet technical medium, it's going to ruin it. Now Retributor armour, brass areas on all the kind of trimmings, sections of the guns, shoulder pads, that kind of thing, before moving on to the Death Guard green, which obviously is the kind of eponymous colour scheme for the Death Guard. Now when you're painting this over the grell and earth, you've got to be really careful. What you don't want to do is stab the brush onto those areas, because you'll fill in the gaps that you've just created with that grell and earth, and you may as well just not have bothered. So move across the grell and earth areas, go gentle, thin coats. You don't want it too watery though, because you don't want it to flow into the cracks. So just be careful on here that we're not clogging up and ruining the work we've done before. Now when you are painting it, the idea is the grell and earth will make the paint look like it's cracking off the model, off the armour. And then what you want to do is you don't need to be 100% accurate and neat and cover up all the silver areas. Because again, the reason I've undercoated, in this case lead belcher, metallic paint undercoat, is that you can miss areas on the armour and things like that, and where there's the bullet impacts and the dents and the damage on it. And if you miss those areas, it then looks like there's several layers of battle damage on this model. So the cracked armour, the areas where the paint's completely flaked off, etc. So you don't have to be 100% careful. Where you do have to be 100% careful is areas like this. So taking some bone white onto all the horns and the teeth and stuff across the model, because again you don't want any metallic showing through on that one, because if you do, it's going to look a bit silly. A tip when painting bone I always find, try and go with the flow of the kind of natural bone. Not that it's natural, it's on a model, but you know what I mean. Because again, it stops the brush stroke showing like a crossways on the large bone areas. Not something that happens often, but it can do. Now Rakkar Flesh is a colour I've used on the skin tones of Plague Marines, all of my paint schemes. Also use it on the Nurglings. So we're taking this and we're putting it onto all the Nurglings, all the flesh areas, and it gives a kind of nice growth fleshy effect. Now I'm doing the Nurglings and the skin with this colour, but the things we'll do later on will differentiate those colours. Now when you're working with the Rakkar Flesh on the models, you're going to find the models with lots of tentacles and kind of things like that. Before you let the paint dry, before you let the Rakkar Flesh dry on those tentacles, you want to dig out the Screamer Pink like I'm doing here and do a little super quick bit of wet blending. So as the Rakkar Flesh is beginning to sort of dry on the model, on the bottom of the tentacle, drop that Screamer Pink on the top and pull it down into where the Rakkar Flesh is, and it will blend in the top of the tentacle. So you start top, work your way down. The top will stay a deep, vibrant pink, and it will get sort of a paler pink further down as it mixes in with the Rakkar Flesh. And if it's not blended quite right, you're not quite happy, take a bit more Rakkar Flesh, start at the bottom, take a bit more Screamer Pink, start at the top, and eventually get that blend where it will be dark pink going into light pink. And I think that adds a nice pop of colour to what is going to be quite a grim dark scheme, but it is nice to have little areas just to that visual difference. Now Royal Purple, again a Vallejo colour. This is just my army colour scheme that I've used on all the cloth across all my army, and it helps tie them all together. And that would be personal choice. You could leave that black, pick whatever colour you want, but I think it's a nice way of making them a little bit more uniform. Similarly with the gun casings here, I'm going for quite a vibrant red. This is going to get dulled down later on, but again, any scheme you want to do to again tie your army together with those gun casings, I think is, personal choice. And on to the flies, again another personal choice point, but I've just gone for a Baden Black over all the flies. There's a lot of little flies to catch into the sort of smoke of the sorcerer's kind of fog that they're creating, and I also use it on all the pipes and tubing and cables as we're going through. Now a point on the differences between this colour scheme and my previous Death Guard colour scheme is the base coat. Here, have you seen, I've base coated it lead belcher, which I think is a great base layer for any futuristic stuff, because it makes battle damage on the armour easy. It also means you don't have to do a lot of painting of metallics. On the first video I did though, I undercoated them Retributor armour, which I would still stand by in a lot of ways because it cuts down all the time painting the brass that we've seen here. One of those two colours is what I would do, and you just reverse it. If you painted it Retributor armour as a base coat, you'd obviously paint on some sort of silver metallic. vice versa. So you've seen there, I've done the brown across all the leather across the models, not too much of that. And again, taking a different brown to paint the wood, and again, not too much of that, but it's onto the handles of all the bolters that are across there. So you've seen as we're going, all the colours are at the top left of the screen, as we're moving on to a Vallejo deep yellow here. And I do use a mix of Vallejo and Games Workshop, but again, entirely for yourself what you're going to use. There's loads of good paint manufacturers out there. This is just what I'm into. Now the deep yellow, as you've seen there, is for all the kind of pustuly, nurgly, horribly bits, and this is really going to form a base layer for the final kind of slimy, gross, nurgle rot effect we're going to do later. So over all the pustules, and there's a lot of areas on these models where there's kind of drips of that kind of nurgle's rot all across the models, so hunt out those areas and paint this yellow onto all those drips and droppy horrible bits. These models are super detailed. Fantastic set that obviously has been out before in the Heroes set. Really pleased to see them back in the Kill Team set, but just go a little bit careful with them because there's detail everywhere. Now the sort of mushroomy growth details on the flamer, I was going to keep a subdued colour, but again it's always fun to add a little bit of a different colour in there. So I went for a vibrant electric blue. I also painted it onto the little things on the ground, whether the mushrooms or whatever, onto all the different models to again bring a little bit of pop of colour. Now you will notice there are these little kind of grubs and bugs galore over these models, particularly on the Sorcerer. So again, taking a Gene Stealer purple and really picking out all of these grubs. Now if you miss some as you go into the scheme, and I very much did, you can go back later, don't worry about it, especially if you're using the wet palette and these paints are on a wet palette there, you will miss things when you're painting these models. There is so many bits of detail on there, and I certainly missed things that I then had to correct later on. Now when all the stages you've done before are thoroughly dry, this is now a Vallejo Sepia game wash. On the channel, if you've watched a lot before, and there's a lot of Death Guard videos on this channel, Death Guard and Nurgle, I bounce between two different kind of washes depending what I'm doing. When I'm doing the 40k models, the more kind of armoured ones, I tend to use this wash, which is a Vallejo Sepia game wash. It's a really dirty, grimy wash. I've also used, though, Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia. Now, if you used Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia, you'd end up with less of a dirty effect at this stage, but you probably wouldn't need to do all the next stages I'm doing. I just think these next stages add a level of detail. So we've really dirtied down the model. So now it really does look grim, grimy, and you could absolutely leave it at this stage and it would look really grim dark, really kind of murky. But I like to lift the colours up at this point. So this is going back over every colour we've already gone through now. So no new colours, this is all the same we've done before, and what we're doing is, again, it's a highlight layer, but you are essentially repainting the model. But when I'm doing it here, this is with the paint has now become watered down on the wet palette, it's been on there, and you put in a really thin layer, and it does go on much faster than it will have done the first time you're going round. And again, the same principles apply. We're not trying to fill in any of the areas we've already done. You are kind of highlighting. You see here, putting it onto the bone, just kind of the very edge of the brush, putting it onto the very top layers. And the idea is you're trying to get this layer of paint onto the very raised areas where the light's going to hit, the sun's going to show, whatever. Working on those areas first, and you're leaving the wash layer into the gaps and cracks at the kind of the edges of the armour, the base of the horn, into the veins of the horn you've seen there. And it's a little bit of experience as you're doing it, because you would put more paint onto the armour panels and cover more of it and just leave it in the very edges. When you come into like here, the tentacles, I'm putting the paint on the very top of the tentacles and leaving the wash down the sides. So more or less, when we're painting like here on the purple, you see that I've just put a line of the purple on the very edge of the cloth. So I'm not going into any of the flat areas because we're just going for the edges. So this is more of an edge highlight. So it's going around with the same colours you used already, painting them on. Now obviously they're going to look more vibrant when they're fresh wet than they will when it dries. But yeah, so different kind of amounts. Here on the bolt you can see just on the very edge of the bolt gun there. And again, the very edge of the bolt gun on the side here. So I'm not putting any of this red onto the flat panels at all. So that's the thing, going around these models now, putting that next layer on to a varying degree. So again, applies for the skin, applies for things, and this is part of my technique that gets a little bit confusing for some people, because it's like, how much do you do, how much do you do it? It's all about experimentation. Again, the easiest way to do this would be to do it with the Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia, and then you don't need to do most of this stages. You can do some gentle highlights, but I really do think this level adds something to the models. Definitely has a bit of time, not as much as you'd think, because you can see here, I'm not actually touching much of the models with the paint, so it's the armour panels that you do the whole lot on. I hope I'm making some kind of sense. But again, Painting the armour, you're going over the whole armour panels, just leaving it at the edge. All the other areas, you are just doing an edge highlight onto some very delicate areas, not putting too much on. So it doesn't really add a great deal of time, but it definitely adds a lot more kind of visual character to these models that I think is fantastic. So yeah, if you've watched the channel for a long time, you will know that this is kind of how my paint schemes work. Again, if you haven't watched the channel before, do all the YouTube stuff, you know, subscribe and all that. But have a look at my playlist. I've got a lot of Death Guard in the force now, so really I'm quite practiced with this scheme. And I think it adds really nice effects and gets the model on the table very, very quickly. Another area I'm actually putting more than just an edge highlight on with this is the yellow, because again, this is more of a base layer for the final effect rather than a finished kind of tone. So yellow, you're putting a bit more on. Now, I mentioned earlier about missing parts of the model. I missed so many of these little kind of buggy maggoty things that are over here. So many of these I missed on the initial skim through, and you'd be amazed that when you're painting them you do that. Now, because I'm putting this layer on top after the wash, you can pick up loads of those little bits of the model that you missed, and there's no problem because they're quite, you know, small, and you won't notice that this is the first layer of paint you've put on. See here with that vibrant blue, and seeing here where I've put it onto the kind of toadstooly things, whatever they're going to be called, that are on the bases of the models. And what I really like about these models is they do tie them together with those little details across all of the models, and you can use that to pull the models together to look a bit more uniform. Not that they ever will completely. Okay, now we're on to the stage where we're using some paints we haven't used in this scheme so far, and this is just to finish off the Plague Bearers, the Nurglings on the bases. It's a bit of Plague Bearer flesh, contrast paint, and very small amounts just across the Nurgling skin, just to make them that bit visually different from the skin on the actual Plague Marines. And then on the Plague Marines, we've already put the Rakkar flesh back over the skin, but now we're taking a Majos purple and dropping some purple just into the shadowed areas of the skin there. So not a super detailed skin paint scheme by any means, but just again variation between the Nurglings and the skin of the Plague Marines. See there, put a bit too much on, took it off. The only thing I've done that I haven't shown and talked about here actually is on the tongue of this model, which I do think is one of the best ones from the set. Dropped a little bit of red on there. Now, all the models have now had time to dry. They've all been varnished. You'll see a slight shine to the models now. In reality, that shine isn't really there. This is just more the lights I'm painting it on. But I do varnish the models because they are gaming pieces. So thoroughly varnished across them. And now it's the Death Guard and Nurgle Player's Friend. This is Nurgle's Rot. Putting this onto all those yellow areas where it's pustules, it's the gribbly bits, whatever. Onto all those dripping areas where we've seen before. And also what you can do with Nurgle's Rot is use it to cover any mistakes. Bit of a cheat sheet, but honestly, if you've got a bit where you've got some green paint on an area it should be red paint on an area it should be green, drop a bit of Nurgle's Rot over it if you spot it in this stage, and it covers a plethora of mistakes. So I'm having it coming out of the pustules, drop it onto the floor, etc., and then the model's finished. So hopefully, nice close-in shot, you can see the cracked armour, and I think that's the real win of this scheme, is those areas of these models where the armour's, you know, cracked and breaking, whether it's on the arm panel on here or down on the legs, whatever. It's subtle. From a distance you are not going to notice it, but close up it really does add that real bit of interest to the models, and you see that the leg there, it really stands out on certain areas of the model. So that's the stage I've added into this paint scheme. I think it really works. I think the rest of it, if you've watched my Death Guard videos before, you've just watched a repeat of how I paint my Death Guard essentially. But there's the two ways to start off with. The two base coats I talked about. Spraying Retributor armour as a base coat would give you the brass, so you wouldn't have to paint the brass areas, and then you'd paint the silver metallic areas, which you'll notice I did nothing with through the whole scheme. If you're not starting with Retributor armour, you start with a lead belcher, which is what I started with. So you'd hand paint the brass areas, and as you see there, again, nothing done at all with the standard metal areas. All it is that dirty wash we've put on has done all those effects to it. So a real time saver in that sense. And I think the set's come out really nicely. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. Hope you like it as well. If you do, like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I will see you on another video.